So, hi everybody, this is Jarrod again with another episode of CX Disruptors. Today, I am very excited to have Blair Pleasant here. She's the president and principal analyst at COMMfusion, but she knows a lot more about herself than I do, so I will let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Jarrod. Yeah, so I'm an independent analyst, and I'm also co-founder of BC Strategies. So check out bcstrategies.com sometime. And basically, I cover contact center, unified communications and collaboration, and anything that falls under the business communications umbrella.
Ooh, that's quite a lot. I guess you stay busy.
Yes, I do.
Ooh, all right. Well, you know a lot, so I'm going to jump right into it. 2023 has been fairly crazy, I think. There's been like so much change, so many new products, so many new things come out. What do you think of all of that is going to impact 2024 the most?
Yeah, well, I think, it goes without saying that the biggest change that'll have the biggest impact is the rise of generative AI and the public awareness of AI technologies like ChatGPT. OpenAI really opened the world to what generative AI can do. And we're really starting to see generative AI in all types of use cases for all types of businesses. And, of course, it's been making a big impact on contact centers. And, most of us know that AI has been around for years, but
Yeah.
public awareness of AI and what it can do really came to the forefront in 2023. And, every organization and everyone that I talk to is looking into, how they can use AI in 2024. And for contact centers, I think what that's going to mean is identifying how best to use AI to, improve the agent and customer experience, to reduce costs, and most important, to improve business outcomes. And a lot of people and a lot of companies are, for good reason, wary of generative AI, and they may be reluctant to use it. So I think for 2024, the focus needs to be on trust, privacy, security, and making sure that the AI solutions help customers and businesses and really provide real business value.
That last point is actually what I wanted to follow up on. I feel like if we're talking about what will impact 2024 in the most, I would definitely say generative AI, but not necessarily the business side of it. It's the consumer awareness that I
Mhm.
think is driving the business side to scramble. And my concern is, yes, there's a lot of value in it, but I wonder if people aren't jumping into it too quickly, or they're only looking at one or two really narrow use cases.
Yeah, and use cases is really the key thing that people really need to focus on. And we just don't want a repeat of what happened when chatbots were first introduced, however many
Yes.
years ago. People just jumped in and started using them, and they weren't very good, and people got really frustrated and stopped using them. So we have to be really careful that the same thing doesn't happen with generative AI, and that companies have a strategy and they really think things through, and they identify the right use cases, they identify where their challenges are and how generative AI can help, and really focus on the business value and improving the customer experience.
You know, I really wonder, I don't know if either of us have the answer. Has anyone learned from that? Because I think we were talking about this recently, that this is really the first time where everyone has been exposed to this amazing, amazing technology, and people actually want to talk to bots now. I mean, how many, you see that in the number of ChatGPT users. People want to, which is the opposite of years and years of horrible experiences. So it's like it's the absolute perfect storm to be able to do it right. But do you think people, like companies, have learned from the original chatbot mistakes?
Probably some have.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies got burned when they, rushed out to deploy chatbots and they just didn't work. And customers, just got really frustrated. So I think some companies learned, which might be why I don't think we're going to see the huge rush to, just pushing things out there as quickly with generative AI, because I think companies realize, we have to get this right. We have to make it a good experience for everybody. And we can't just put out something that doesn't really work quite right.
And that's the problem, is people have, there's a high bar because they've seen it work right on ChatGPT. Even if that's really a little bit of a different thing, that's what they expect. And they know
Yeah,
it's
but
possible.
Yeah, and people are amazed when they try ChatGPT. When I show it to friends who aren't technical, and I um, we just try it out, and people are just absolutely blown away. So when you can use it for contact centers and for self-service and see what it can really do when it works right, it's a game changer.
Yeah. I just hope we get it right.
Yeah.
But speaking exactly of that, what do you think then that contact centers should be changing, for the new year, and what should they be getting rid of?
Yeah, I don't think it's about technology as much as it is about changing the mindset.
Mhm.
Business is an important part of the customer experience, and really get rid of the old notion of contact centers being cost centers and
Yeah,
agents just not really being valued. They need to think about agents as you know, being engaged and being enabled and being empowered to really help customers and to get job satisfaction.
yeah.
We don't want to have agents just, churning all the time the way they have been. So that really means giving them the right tools to be more effective and to let them do their jobs better. So I think changing the mindset about what the context really means. And that also means changing some of the metrics and the way they measure success. So instead of, focusing on average talk time or average handle time, which has been, the main focus over, however many years, they should really focus on, customer satisfaction. Did the customer get what was needed? Are they happy with the experience? Were they able to get their question answered and their issue resolved? So for me, it's not so much about getting rid of technology, but about getting rid of old mindsets.
And do you think on the whole we're there, or that there's still a lot of work to do?
It's a mix. For some companies, they just see contact centers as a way to, you know, um, they just see it as a cost center and they want to, cut costs as much as possible. They don't mind if there's agent churn. They don't really care about the customer experience. It's just something that they have to do. And then for others, and I'm sure a lot of Cognigy customers, they really focus on that customer experience and getting it right. So I think it really is a mix. And, we've seen some great examples of companies that really do focus on the customer and agent experience. And then we've
Mhm.
seen some that haven't. So it's we talk about customer experience so much and how it can be, that competitive differentiator. And some companies get it and some companies don't.
I think the problem is for some of them it's not. I feel like there's still certain industries or where there's just no competition. I don't want to name cable companies specifically, um, where they can really get away with murder because you're locked in. Um,
Yeah, but how many people are cutting the cord these days? How many people are,
exactly.
drop. So I think people realize that they do want that good experience and they do have options. And I've been really impressed with airlines lately. I've been
Really.
hearing so many, yeah, I've been hearing so many examples of different airlines using generative AI and really deploying some really interesting use cases with it. So I think we are going to start seeing some changes going forward. At least I hope we are.
As someone who flies internationally a lot, I sure hope the airlines come first. But I have
I,
some of them are doing
it,
a good job. I don't want to name names, but definitely some of them are.
yep,
Let's jump to maybe the easier or the hardest one. Predictions for 2024.
yeah.
What do you envision?
Yeah, so again, with keeping with the AI theme, I think it's going to be a year of experimentation with AI and automation. And there's going to be a lot of trial and error. Like we were
Yeah.
talking about, some people are going to get it right, some people are just going to jump in and throw it out there. So I think businesses are really going to have to spend time figuring out, what works and what doesn't. Again, going back to the use cases, they have to find those right use cases, and they have to figure out, where to invest their money, because there are so many different options. So I think there's going to be a big focus on, figuring out where to start and how to get started. And for companies that already have deployed AI, they're going to be looking to expand to other use cases so they can get even more value. But I think there will be a lot of use cases or a lot of success stories and successful case studies, but I think there's also going to be a lot of false starts and again a lot of trial and error as some businesses do rush to deploy it without making sure that they choose the right vendor, the right use cases, and that they deploy AI properly so that it does give customers that really good customer experience.
I like that you said it will be a year of experimentation. I think you're the first person I've heard not say, "Oh, it's the year of AI. It's everything's AI is going to eat the world." Blah blah blah. But hey, look, it's coming. There's going to be a
Mhm.
lot of trial and error along the way, and realistically, a year is probably a nice conservative estimate, right?
Especially for contact centers.
Yeah. Uh, well, that was a great answer, I have to say. So, given that, what advice would you give to to CX leaders, to people in those contact centers going into 2024?
I'd say the first thing would be identify where AI makes sense for your organization. Have a strategy and be thoughtful about where and how you deploy it. You might want to start with one or two key use cases that can provide the most, bang for the buck. Things like agent assist that help the agent be more effective. So I'd say be really careful also when deploying customer-facing applications with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Work with your vendor or your provider to make sure that the application is easy to use and it has that positive user experience. When it's working in the back for the agent, you don't have to be quite as careful, but when it's
Yeah.
customer facing, you don't want to get it wrong. You really want to make sure that it works right. And again, we talked about chatbots. We don't want a repeat of that. Um, when chatbots were first introduced and people hated them because they were
Yep.
so frustrating. So I think really focus on doing it right, and also think beyond just cutting costs and maybe replacing agents. Think about how to improve the customer experience, how to improve the agent experience, how to improve operations. Cost savings are great and they're really important, but it's not the end all be all.
It feels
So
like
my
that's more a
advice,
result, right? I mean, if you do
yeah,
all these other things right, you're going to get the efficiencies, you're going to get the cost savings. Maybe you could
right, but
squeeze a few extra dollars out if that was the focus, but that's not why you exist as a company. That's not your mission.
exactly. But some people are looking at AI as, oh, great, I can get rid of my agents, or I can, reduce the number of agents. And that's not the answer. That's not, you know, the what companies should be thinking about.
Tell me who
Um,
so I can sell stock.
I think some.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, it definitely, start experimenting with AI, think about the use cases, but have a strategy and do it thoughtfully and strategically, and don't just rush out to do it.
And you would probably, I sort of implicitly got the feeling, start internally before you go customer facing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are great, self-service use cases out there,
Yeah.
and Cognigy is doing a great job with it. But I think for companies getting started, again, it's if you mess up in customer-facing applications, then it's really a problem. If you have some issues, in the back office, people aren't going to be seeing it as much, and it's not going to impact you as much. But I think when it's customer facing, you have to be really careful.
Yeah. All right. So I've got one last one for you. We've talked about predictions. We've talked about all the things that have changed, a year of experimentation. What will not change? What's going to stay the same? Nobody talks about that.
Self-service. I think one thing that's not going to change is the importance of customer self-service. We've seen that, really growing over, the past few years, especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, we all talk about how customers are more demanding. They don't want to wait on hold for an agent. They want to get the information they need, when they need it, when they
Mhm.
want it. And a lot of customers do prefer self-service these days, especially, for basic interactions that don't require talking to an agent. You talk to someone, well, it used to be, younger people, were the ones who wanted self-service, but studies I've done show that it's across the board, it's all ages. People really like self-service when it works.
Yeah.
But again, that's the thing. You have to make sure that it works right. People want, that seamless experience that works and that isn't frustrating. So I think the need for good customer service is going to continue, for the foreseeable future. But again, we have to do it right.
All right. And that's the hard part.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.